Wicked for Good released a couple of weeks ago now, and I saw it quite a while ago. I'd initially planned on making a video about it in the immediate aftermath, but I ended up getting really sick and now I'm just working on the backlog. I was actually really hyped up for the release of Wicked for Good. Last year we saw the release of the musical film Wicked, a screen adaptation of the stage sensation, which in turn was an adaptation of a book, which in turn is a reimagining of the original story of The Wizard of Oz, which is of course at this point considered a timeless classic of a film/franchise. Going into it, I didn't really know much about the stage version or anything like that. I just knew about Defying Gravity and that was the major song, and that was that. I mean, I had a vague idea of what direction the story might go simply from knowing The Wizard of Oz, but even then, it wasn't giving me much certainty about the narrative of the movie. I went to see it, and what do you know? It was absolutely incredible with great songs, top-tier visuals, great acting, and chemistry between the actors, and an intriguing story. What's not to love, right? On top of that, it seemed to be very well received, with an 88% critical approval rating and a 95% audience approval rating, whilst also grossing $759 million at the box office. This makes it the highest grossing musical film adaptation ever, which is a pretty impressive feat, and with only a year to wait between installments, they were coming in hot in terms of hype for Wicked for Good. As I said, I really do know nothing about the musical other than a single song and the OG source material, so I was largely flying blind when taking a look at the trailers and whatnot about what the second act was going to be like, but regardless, I was very excited for everything going on. So then I went to see the film itself, and I don't know, it's not that the film was bad, don't get me wrong, I actually rather liked it. I think it's more that I came away from the first film feeling really hyped up, and it stuck in my mind for quite a while. Meanwhile, I just don't think this felt the same, really. I did read somewhere that the second act of the musical is considered to be much weaker than the first, which, when you watch the film, becomes very clear, and honestly, I think it all comes down to the narrative, doesn't it? Because it's not like the other elements of the film are any worse. It just doesn't hit quite the same across the board, and you can see that in the commercial side of things, where it doesn't seem to have the same legs at the box office as the first movie. Usually, you'd expect the big second part finale to draw in more of a box office off the back of the hype of the first one, but this just hasn't happened. As of right now, it's grossed a grand total of $440 million at the box office, and doesn't seem likely to have the staying power to equal or surpass the box office of the first film. It just doesn't seem to have anywhere near the same impact whatsoever, and it's a bit of a shame really, but having seen the movie, it isn't much of a surprise either. It really just doesn't live up to the first installment, and like I said before, it all comes down to the narrative side of things, because honestly I think everything else is really solid, if at times a bit forgettable. In terms of the visuals, and here we're talking effects, world design, costume, cinematography, etc., there is really nothing that sets Wicked for Good down a rung compared to the first movie. The reality is that it was just as good in those aspects as the first movie, and it really should be because it was a double feature. It was filmed all at once with the same creative team. It's not like this was a sequel that was filmed later and didn't hit the same vibes as the first one. It was still good in this way. It's the same deal for the acting performances. Nobody was really better or worse than they were in terms of the original movie. Ariana Grande, Jonathan Bailey, Cynthia Erivo, they were all great in their roles and they fit in extremely well with their performances in the first movie, which makes a lot of sense because they shot it all at once. There was no time to get in their own head or for things to slightly shift in the performance. It all just really worked well in that way. In fact, I think in this movie there was actually an opportunity for some of the more minor characters to shine. I thought that Nessa Rose and Bok were probably the two that got more key sequences here that showcased their talent really well. On top of that, the chemistry between the actors was as good as it ever was, so nothing to complain about on that score either. As for the music, I do think the majority of the best songs were actually in the first one. Part of me does think that this dulled the hype somewhat. It's not that the songs in this film are bad or anything like that, they just aren't the same as part one. And so you don't walk away from the movie with this earworm vibe going where a song is stuck in your head and you're compelled to go and stream it again and again. I mean, there are just a bunch of songs that went so hard from the first movie that I still listen to today. Obviously there's Defying Gravity, which was already so iconic that I'd heard it before I saw the film, but then there's Popular and Dancing Through Life as well that keep on rattling around in my head, and I keep coming back to them from time to time. I mean, I'm looking at the track listing for Wicked for Good and the names just aren't jumping out at me in the same way, and I think this has played a part in the film feeling less hype and less prominent. That being said, it's not like the music's bad or mediocre or anything like that, it's just not on the same level. What is kind of mediocre is the story. I just don't think that it's massively engaging, at least compared to what we got in the first half. The story picks up apparently a year after the events of the first film, and the Wizard of Morrible's propaganda has entered full effect, and Elphaba is now commonly known as the Wicked Witch of the West, who commits terrible crimes against the people of Oz. She's essentially turned into the boogeyman. Obviously, we know that it's all a bunch of BS, seeing as she's doing all this and using her magic to try to fight for animal rights. Meanwhile, Glinda's joined the Wizard's side and is the other side of the coin for the same propaganda machine, and is now engaged to Fiyero, who's clearly not in love with her and not feeling the relationship. Hell, he didn't even propose at all. He was told that they were getting married when on stage in front of the city populace. How romantic. This is probably my first eyebrow raiser as well, because if you look at the significance of the screen time, it's pretty clear the second part of Wicked is anchored heavily by Glinda. Yes, Elphaba's still the lead protagonist in most ways, but For Good felt like Glinda's story. Here she's presented as having willingly joined up with the fascist government and betrayed her friend, which is a strange choice already, and yet we're clearly supposed to somewhat like and agree with her. She continually chooses the wrong side, and in a bout of heartbreak, she suggests they target Nesteros to get to Elphaba, which in turn gets Nesteros killed, although that was a bit of just desserts if you ask me. Yeah, she said they should only make a rumor that Nesteros was in trouble, but still. She's also a big contributing factor to Fiero getting beaten to death and only being saved by magically being transformed into a scarecrow by Elphaba. Her actions already seem sort of unforgivable, right? She betrays her friend and knowingly works for the very people who are actively scapegoating animals and locking them up until they lose their ability to talk at all. It's not really the type of storyline that heroes are made of, but I figured this was the point. Yet it does feel as though the story tries to justify her there at the end by having it be that since she was a high-up collaborator, she'll be able to use the propaganda machine they created to do good and spread good messages. Thus, in the end, despite her being rather terrible when you think about it, she very much wins and faces no consequences beyond the supposed deaths of Fiero and Elphaba. I don't know, it just feels a little bit weird, you know? For me, it felt like the ending was primarily, good thing you joined the fascists because now you're in the perfect position to rule all of Oz, but don't worry, you'll be a good ruler who does good things because you're the good witch, despite going along with the horrible status quo almost to the very end. However, that's just the ending. There's still more to discuss beforehand. Elphaba hasn't spent this last year idle. She's been fighting the good fight and slowly but surely mastering her magical abilities. Despite this though, nothing's really going her way, as Oz is largely against her, and even the talking animals she's protecting don't have faith in her once the Cowardly Lion comes out and tells them that she's the one that created the flying monkeys. She eventually makes her way to Munchkinland, and here we actually got one of the more interesting and well-written storylines. In the time since the end of the first movie, their fathers died and Nesteros has become the new governor of Munchkinland. At the same time though, the negative traits she exhibited in the first movie have gotten worse and worse, and she's become an outright villain, but one who has depth of character because you can see that there's some goodness in there somewhere, but it's been twisted by her entitled and spoiled upbringing, as well as her own fear of losing Bok and not being fully in control. Thus, she's fully complying with the wizard's laws, but also taking things a step further and controlling who's allowed to leave Munchkinland completely, not just restricting animals. This, of course, all comes after it's revealed that Bok wants to leave her because he's still in love with Glinda after all this time, and he still truly thinks he has a shot. Elphaba visits and it goes badly, and Nessie uses a spell to try to stop Bok leaving her, but in turn actually starts to shrink his heart into non-existence. To save him, Elphaba's forced to turn him into a Tin Man, which he doesn't react well to at all. I actually really like the writing for Bok here. He starts off as a man trapped in an abusive relationship with a clearly unstable woman. Yeah, he shouldn't have let it get this far to begin with, but at the same time, I don't think he's presented as a really bad person either. He's clearly good at his core, and he protests against Nesteros restricting the rights of animals. At the same time, you can see early on that he's still easily led because he believes the propaganda about Elphaba and is frightened of her, and then he believes that Elphaba cursed him to be the Tin Man when in reality, she saved him from her sister's foolishness. Then, over the course of the movie, the rage clouds his mind, and he begins to act rather heartless and cruel. I honestly wish he got more screen time in that form outside of his one or two scenes, because he was really compelling. Elphaba then arrives at the Emerald City and considers joining Glinda and the Wizard until the leader of the Flying Monkeys shows her the truth that the Wizard is even worse than she knew, and so she frees all the animals from the dungeon and escapes, but now the Flying Monkeys work for her. Also, the wedding's ruined and Fiero escapes alongside her, and they have their romance scene, which I found very sweet and compelling. This was another really strong part of the movie, and I really don't think it starts losing its way for me properly until Nesteros gets whacked by Morrible. Nesteros gets crushed by the house, and both Glinda and Elphaba have a very funny fight sequence which spirals into Fiero getting arrested and beaten almost to death in a field. Elphaba and the monkeys manage to escape, and then Elphaba turns him into a scarecrow to try to save him. She then decides that since she keeps failing at being good, she's going to lean into becoming the Wicked Witch they all believe she is, whilst the Wizard of Oz quartet arrive at the Emerald City and are given the fateful instruction to bring the Wizard the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West and kill her along the way. Honestly, it's kind of crazy to me that he ever thought this would work to begin with. Maybe he was just desperate at this point. Elphaba kidnaps Dorothy, demanding that she give her the shoes that she'd enchanted to allow Nesteros to fly earlier in the movie, and then Glinda turns up and they have a big emotional farewell. Elphaba gets splashed with the water, she fakes her death, and she goes off into the unknown with Fiero the Scarecrow. Before that though, she tells Glinda that she needs to lead and change things for good, and to not speak up for Elphaba, because it would simply turn the people against Glinda because the propaganda is too firmly entrenched. The lead flying monkey regains his ability to speak, and he hands over a bottle that belonged to Elphaba's mother, which Glinda recognizes as the Wizard's. She shows him this, and he realizes the truth, and it breaks his will, which seemed a bit forced, if you asked me, but it's how the story goes. I just don't think that having that sort of regret to the point that he's incapacitated by it and shuffled off into exile by Glinda fit with the character we'd seen for the majority of the first movie, and then again in this one, you know? He leaves Oz for good, and Glinda arrests Morrible and locks her away in a cage forever, before restoring animal rights to all of Oz, freeing those who were imprisoned, and inviting those in exile or in hiding to return to their homes and lives again. I don't know, I just think it went from 0 to 100 after the midpoint of the film. To me, the most interesting part would have been seeing Elphaba go fully wicked and crazy after all the bullshit she's been put through, only for the power of love and friendship to pull her back from the brink just there at the end before her supposed death. I also would have liked to see some of those scenes from The Wizard of Oz from her POV, but also getting to see the reactions of the members of the Oz Quartet as they adventure towards the Emerald City. Seeing how Bok gets more and more hateful over the trip, or seeing the Scarecrow become more and more worried sad about what's happening. I just think this would have worked better for the story. I don't know, I walked away from it feeling very dissatisfied, and that's a shame because it had so much promise. I get wanting to stay true to the story, but come on now. If the latter half is famously weaker, you gotta put in the effort to improve it, right? Also, I wanted more of the main couple as well. Is that seriously all there was gonna be? Is that all there was in the musical? Just one love scene? Bit of a tease? In the end, I can see why it's not performing on the level of the first one. It just isn't as good. It's a shame, but it is what it is, and so with all that being said, these have been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Wicked for Good? Did you like it? Hate it? Somewhere in between? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.